to Under the Bonnet. In fact, it's Under the Bonnet of Hebrews. You may wonder what this is about and why I'm sitting in the balcony at Night and Free Church with Andy, but really glad that you've decided to watch this. Andy, what is this all about, please?
Yes, I was asking myself that earlier today. Fiona, it's basically a realization that everything that we knew has been changed by this pandemic. That trying to concentrate for 30, maybe 40 sometimes minutes to a sermon is really, really hard when it's kind of online and so on. So also, I guess we're aware more people are watching, and we want to make this as simple as possible for folk to understand. So why not try? The idea was, why not try a slightly shorter sermon on Sunday? It wasn't slightly shorter. I'm going to do better this Sunday. And then go into a bit more detail midweek. Well, this is a bit more detail, right? This is what we
don't want people to miss out.
We don't want people to miss out. I've got Fiona here because you've done some Hebrews, right? Tell us about that.
So my kind of history of Hebrews is that years ago, I remember starting to read it and look at it, and I unfortunately picked a commentary that was just incomprehensible. And I just got really confused with all the Old Testament quotes. And just to be honest, this isn't great, but I just thought, Hebrews, too complicated, not for me. I'll just concentrate on the easier ones. And to be honest, didn't look at it for years. All I did was I just picked out the nice verses that are well known, but never really got the hang of it and just avoided it. And then I decided that I should really do a bit better than that, and decided to look at it with woman to woman. And basically just kind of began to understand it a bit better. So now I'm really excited about it. And I'd really love people not to be stuck how I was, thinking, this is totally confusing, I'm just going to avoid it. So that would be what I would really want us to be doing now, is helping people to love Hebrews and feed off it.
So what's your strap line for Hebrews? Well, it's not yours.
It's not my strap line. The strap line, which I have got from other people and I think is right, is basically really simple. Jesus is better. Jesus is better than a whole lot of other things. And that's what we did, woman to woman. If you came to woman to woman, you'll remember every single week we went back over that Jesus is better. And if that's all you remember from looking at Hebrews, that is fantastic.
All right, so you want us to start by thinking a little bit about the background and what's going on. Fiona's going to chip in here. This isn't going to be me doing everything. The background to the letter is, look, I think it's difficult for us because it feels quite far away, not just in terms of time, but the original readers came from a Jewish background. They were Jews. They heard about the Lord Jesus Christ and they became Christians, right? And the temptation for them now is, actually, because of persecution, maybe because of peer group, they're tempted to head back again into Judaism, to as the writer says in chapter 2, to drift. And so what the writer's doing is he's showing, no, you don't want to do that because Jesus is better, right? And we saw right at the beginning, week 1, he's better than all the prophets because God has spoken to us by his Son in these last days. He is the kind of the last word that God has to us. We saw that chapter 3 is better than, chapter 1, he's better than the angels. Chapter 3, he's better than Moses. It just kind of goes on and on and on. And at the same time, because it's warm, it's pastoral, he's warning us, don't drift, don't go back, don't harden your hearts. So the first part is really how the Son is better than these things. And then we come to the middle bit, which is all about the high priest. And this is the technical bit, and this is why we're kind of doing this now. And then the last bit, the last part of this book is really he's just applying it and encouraging them and challenging them to live by faith. What do you want to add to that?
So they wanted to, the reason it was hard for them was partly because Judaism in the first century, it wasn't great, but it was a kind of accepted religion, and so it was acceptable to go to the synagogue and to do the sort of the Jewish, follow the Jewish rituals. But Christianity was some kind of weird cult that was kind of questionable, and the Christians were beginning to be persecuted. You see that later on in the letter. And so it was natural to want to avoid a costly faith and to go back to the kind of mainstream, what everyone else was doing. And it was also because you could taste and smell and touch what was going on in the temple. You could see it. It was fabulously rich, and the temple was the most amazing place, and there was blood from the sacrifices, all sorts of things going on that you could smell, you could see, you could touch. And then there's a slightly odd cult where you can't see Jesus, it's all by faith. And so it's natural to go back to what is kind of tangible. And so it was really tough for them. It was a difficult situation. What I love about it, and I think what we need to be really careful about, is that because Hebrews is quite dense, I think it's like a really rich chocolate cake. And so you can't have too much of it at a time. We want to savour it. That's kind of also why hopefully these will be helpful. It's a chance to kind of slow down and savour and really kind of savour the kind of the richness of it. But in doing that, we could easily end up with it just being a theological commentary, and that's absolutely not what the letter's written for. It's a real letter written by a real person to real Christians who are struggling. And all the way through the letter, it's very warm. You can see the pastoral heart. It's a pastor talking to his people. And if you look right at the end in chapter 13, verse 22, 13 verse 22, brothers and sisters, I urge you to bear with my word of exhortation, for in fact I've written to you quite briefly. I think that's a bit of a laugh because it is actually quite a long letter. But he's wanting to warn them, he's wanting to challenge them. This is written to a real situation. So if we start kind of thinking, oh yes, I can kind of understand the structure of Hebrews and I could write an essay on it, we've kind of missed the point. This is a real letter to real people. And if we just lift up the bonnet to kind of admire the engine and then just close the bonnet again, this is like a waste of time. What we're wanting to do is to understand it in a deeper way, so that we can live it, we can actually put it into practice. Does that kind of make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Now look, this isn't scripted.
In case you hadn't realised.
You may have guessed that. So this is we're just doing this in one take and however it comes. You're going to ask a series of questions. You're going to read the passage and ask a series of questions. It may be that you're thinking, guys, I don't want to, I'm hoping you're going to cover one question. If you look down, if I got this right, there should be kind of time markers and we put what the questions are in those time markers. So you can just whip straight to that. Or you may want to just stay for the whole thing. Why not? Fiona, just read. It's
going to be about half an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be about half an hour. So read our passage to us.
Okay, so this is the passage that Andy preached on Sunday. And it's Hebrews chapter 4, starting at verse 14 to verse 5, verse 10. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to feel sympathy for our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sin. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is subject to weaknesses. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people. And no one takes this honour on himself, but he receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Great.
So we have some questions. There are some questions that we're going to go through. These will be perhaps some things that you've asked, maybe some things that you wouldn't have thought of, but hopefully they'll be helpful. So I'm going to ask them and Andy's going to answer them.
We're going to answer them.
So Andy, in verse, I'm afraid I can't see very well because I'm quite short-sighted, but in verse 14, it says that this high priest has ascended into heaven. What does that mean?
Yeah, it may seem obvious, but maybe you're new to the Christian faith. So God becomes man. Think of Christmas. The Son of God takes on human flesh. Amazing moment. We call that the incarnation. He lives. He dies on the cross. And the Father raises him from the dead. We call that the resurrection. And then there's a period of time, 40 days between after the resurrection, when Jesus appears to various groups. He does some teaching and so on. And then we're told, and this is at the beginning of Acts, that he ascends into heaven before, as the disciples are watching. He literally rises into the clouds. So that's what it means. And here we have, he ascends into the heavens, which is incredible, isn't it? And you were saying it's actually mentioned earlier in Hebrews as well, isn't it?
In chapter 1, verse 3, again, it's really handy when we're looking at books of the Bible to try and, as we get to know the letter better, to try and understand the letter from the letter. So if there's other bits about him ascending, that will maybe help us. So chapter 1 of Hebrews, verse 3, it says, after he, this is Jesus, had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he's not just ascended in, he's not just kind of floating around in heaven somewhere. He is actually sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven, at the kind of the most authoritative place.
So it's a little like there are two dimensions at the moment. There's heaven and there's earth. And Jesus passes from heaven to earth in the incarnation, and then from earth to heaven in the ascension. And that's exciting because it means that right now, at the right hand of God, there is a human being, fully God, but fully man. And the glorious thing is that one day, heaven and earth will, rather than being separated, will come together. And those who follow Jesus will be with Jesus. And that is going to be great. I could go on all day. Let's stop there.
Okay, so that's great, the fact that Jesus has ascended into heaven. And as a result of that, the writer is encouraging these Hebrews, these Christians, Jewish Christians, to, what does it say there? Because Jesus ascended to heaven, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. What does it actually mean? How do you hold on to something you can't see? What does that look like?
So again, it's against the background of the fact they're drifting, and rather than drifting, he wants them to hold firmly. And there are a number of things, aren't there? But I think in the context here, it's that they're praying, isn't it? That they're actually turning to God in their weakness and in their temptation. They're turning to God to receive mercy and to find grace. So what does it look like? It looks like me on a Monday morning hauling my soggy bottom out of bed and speaking to God about the day, rather than just piling into the day because I can deal with it and I can sort it out. or pulling the duvet over me because I can't deal with it and I can't sort it out. I guess, something like that.
And I guess what's hard for them is that this kind of approaching God's throne of grace, which we hear about in verse 16, it's something, again, it's something we can't see. You can really feel for these Christians, because in the Jewish faith, they went to this fabulous temple, and they could see, they had a high priest they could see with all his amazing, Andy had the picture of him up on Sunday, and they could smell the incense, they could smell the smoke, they could hear the animals being slaughtered. They didn't need faith to kind of to grasp that, because they could see it and smell it and almost touch it. Whereas for the Christians who are reading this letter, or not reading it, they're listening to it, this is all something they can't see. They're having to approach this throne of grace in heaven that they can't see. And to be honest, when I'm reading my Bible, and trying to pray, it's me and my Bible and the desk. If I could see this throne of grace, then I wouldn't have such a problem with coming to God and praying. So I think it's kind of believing something we can't see is a hard thing to do, and that's called faith, isn't it? And that's one of the big battles of the Christian life, is to take God at his word and believe that if he says he's on the throne of grace and we need to come to him for help, that's what we need to do.
So it's living my life in the light of what I know about him. If you want to know more about that, tune in on Sunday.
And I think it's interesting in verse 16 that he assumes that we will need mercy and that we will have times of need. I think that's really encouraging. God doesn't expect us to be superheroes. He knows that we need mercy. He is totally aware of the mess in our lives and the sin, and he knows that we are weak. And he has given us somewhere to go. And we all, everyone I talk to, we've all got struggles, we've all got difficulties. And we need to come to God's throne and to tell him about it and to ask. That's as simple as that. Children do it, don't they? Children know about talking to Jesus and saying, I'm sorry, I hit my brother and please help me because I'm scared about school tomorrow. It's not complicated. But it's because we can't see it, it's difficult. Is that okay? Nothing else to add?
No.
So another question, it talks about, which verse is it? Jesus being tempted in every way, just as we are, which is verse 15. What on earth does that mean? How could Jesus have been tempted? Because he lived like years and years ago.
Loads written about it. Some people go, yes, literally in every way he was tempted. Every single temptation known to man he knew. I don't think that's what it's saying. I think it's more in all sorts of ways he was tempted. That could lead somebody to go, oh well, I don't know. I'm a more senior person. I'm struggling with a body that's not working at the moment. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know what that's like. And I think it's simply that the Son of God becomes a human being. He lives in the frailty of flesh, and he understands what that's like. And so, no, he may not know what it's like to have a prosthetic leg, or to have arthritis or whatever it is, but he certainly knows what it is to have a body that's broken. And you could go on and on like that. I think the other thing is that there's this sense that Jesus can see into a person, and he can see into everybody around him, and he knows the battles that they're facing and that they're struggling. And just think about that. It's amazing, is the crowds around him and so on. He's got a sense of what they're facing, what they're going through. So I think the encouragement of this is he really does understand. And how wonderful that as Christians we have a God who's not just safe up in his heaven, happy up there, telling us to get on with it down here. But he leaves his throne and comes and lives and suffers and is tempted and experiences weakness and pain and hardship. He knows what it's like.
I just find that
Amazing.
really helpful.
Yeah.
He's not just kind of slapping us and saying, get a grip. It's much more like a friend who also, say, struggles with the same thing we struggle with, coming alongside and yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? Let's tackle it like this. Let's do this together. And I just find that really helpful, because for me, someone who's perfect and has never struggled and is just saying, toughen up, get a grip, that really isn't helpful at all. So the next thing that you might have a question about would be this idea of this throne of grace. We have kind of touched on this already, but what does it actually mean, throne of grace? Is this something we're meant to visualize? Is it? Yeah, it's quite a kind of, we all know what the Queen's throne looks like, or sort of things on the telly. But what is this throne of grace? What does it mean?
I mean, I think it kind of means what it says on the tin. So it's a throne. What is a throne? It's a place where a king or a queen rules from. So this is the king of the universe ruling from his throne. And just pause there and think about that. Followers of Jesus, you have access to the highest throne in the universe. Wow. But it's a throne of grace. Oh, thank goodness for that. That you don't come there and he doesn't cut you off straight away because you've broken any number of his laws and turned your back on his person. He's full of grace and mercy and love. So he's this powerful king who rules on his throne, full of grace and love. And you said it's got something to do with prayer as well in the context. Yes,
yeah. It's the idea of coming. This is where we're coming to ask him for help, really. We're not, we're coming somewhere that's powerful. I guess sometimes it helps if you think, what would you expect this to say? And if I was, obviously I'm not writing this, but if I was writing it, I would expect this to say, let us then approach God's throne of power and strength and might and glory in a kind of slightly scared, cowering way. But it doesn't. It's God's throne, the place of almighty power. But it's a throne of grace. It's a throne that where we are given what we don't deserve. We deserve to be on our faces, probably not even in the throne room. But it's a throne of grace. And we have to approach it confidently, not kind of like sort of, in the films where they're kind of cower, waiting to get their heads chopped off. It's not that kind of throne. It's a throne of grace that we can approach with confidence just because Jesus has died. And that was completely different in the synagogue, in for the Jewish faith. That was not how they could approach God. So again, why would you not? Why would you want to drift away from this if this is on offer? Why would you want to go somewhere else? So yeah, do think about that, and maybe even consciously, when you sit down to pray, actually think, I am approaching God's throne of grace with my needs, with the things I struggle with. I remember a vicar of mine in London years ago, I remember him saying, have you approached God's throne of grace this morning? And just thinking of that's what I'm doing in prayer, I think can just help us to get away from that just sense of just going through the motions. This is really difficult. This is one of the things I find hardest about Hebrews is these Old Testament quotes. Yeah. What are they? Why are they there? The reason that they're here is that they would have been much better understood by the original readers of this because they knew their Old Testaments. They were Jews. And that's where we have difficulty because we're not Jews. We don't understand our Old Testaments very well. And so that's why we can expect this to be more tricky. So verse 5, what is this quote? Why is it there? Where's it from? What's going on?
Okay, so it says, you're my son, today I've become your father. Confusing because obviously about Jesus, and you're thinking, hang on, today I've become your father, but I thought, hang on, the whole point was that the Father has always been the Father to the Son. Why is he saying it? Today I've become your Father. And I guess it's because Jesus is coming in as the Messiah. and there's a line of David, okay, to which the Messiah comes in. And this comes from Psalm 2, and in Psalm 2, it's being written as if God is speaking to the king, to David. And he's saying there, look, I'm adopting you now, not just as my follower, not just as the king of Israel, I'm adopting you as my son. Wow, number one. And he's publicly doing it to everybody. Look, this is now my son. Incredible. And what I guess the writer of the Hebrews is doing is just showing the kind of, it's not really irony, but just showing the kind of the double-sided nature of this, which is, yeah, and Jesus follows in that line, so he's also the adopted son. But hang on, he's not just the adopted son, he is the son. Wow. So it's kind of like a double whammy of sonship, if you like, that's going on. But it's not saying that, you know, at some point the father has suddenly got, okay, you're my son. He's always been the son. It's just showing here, publicly, he's acknowledged at a certain time in history as the son. I think that's what's happening.
So you could kind of say it's saying that Jesus is better.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, all right.
I kind of think with
We're going to have that a
something
lot,
that's
aren't we?
quite complicated sometimes, it's quite good to work out what the wood is, and then you can kind of focus in on the trees.
Yeah.
If you just focus in on the tree, you can get confused. So that's why it's quite helpful. Okay, so another nice little question here is, who is this Melchizedek person in verse 6? What on earth? Why bring in some random person who we've never heard of?
So we touched on it on Sunday. It's slightly because, so what's happening here is, all right, doing your Jesus is better. Jesus is better than the old high priest. And one of the things that somebody could have said, well, wait a minute, are you sure about that? Because the high priest has to come from the line of Aaron. They were always the priests. And Jesus doesn't come from the line of Aaron.
Jesus comes from the line of Judah.
Exactly. And
So
Aaron's
what is going
Levi.
on?
Aaron's the tribe of Levi. Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah. Whoa, wait a minute.
How
He's
can he be
not
a
better.
priest? Yeah.
And the writer is going, well, there wasn't just this one set of priests in the Bible. Yes, there's the line of Aaron, but there's also this mysterious guy, Melchizedek, who appears to Abraham in Genesis 14.
Yeah.
And what's incredible about him is, I think Abraham's just been off on a bit of a battle.
Yes.
He comes back, and in suddenly walks this priest, this guy Melchizedek. He appears from nowhere. What does Abraham do? He gives him
his tenth of the spoils of war.
There you go. And the Melchizedek blesses him, and then he disappears again. And we never hear from him again.
He's
right?
like a kind of mysterious. This is probably a bit mean because Jake is preaching on this in a couple of weeks.
No,
time.
he's not actually.
Oh, is he not? Are you doing it? Okay. Oh well, it doesn't matter if I spoil Andy's sermon.
That's all right.
But basically, Genesis, which is where Melchizedek appears and then disappears, the whole big thing in Genesis is genealogies. Is somebody was descended from somebody, and from somebody, and then they lived, and then they died. There's a huge amount of genealogies in Genesis, whereas Melchizedek is really weird. You're not told who he's descended from, and you're never told that he's died. Now, that doesn't mean he was kind of some non-human kind of angel or ghost or something. He was a real human being, but it's just that his ancestry and his descendants aren't actually written down in Genesis. So he's really unusual in that way, and in that way he's pointing to Jesus, who is eternal. Jesus hasn't descended from a line and doesn't have descendants in the kind of physical way. So Melchizedek is just like a whole different kind of priest. And Melchizedek means king of righteousness.
Oh, I didn't know that.
King of Jerusalem,
Okay.
king of peace,
Yeah.
kind of things like that. So yeah, I think it's really exciting because again, I didn't understand for a long time what this was all about, but it just means Melchizedek was in the Bible's terms, was seen as being some kind of eternal priest, and so Jesus is connected with him. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
So it's basically all it's saying is Jesus is better because he's eternal and he doesn't die, and another one had to take over from him. So why is Jesus, a little bit further on, verse 7, offering up prayers and petitions with fervent cries? What's going on here? And it says the one who could have saved him from death. God didn't hear Jesus' prayers because he died on the cross. What's going on there?
Well, it's saying he offers up prayers and petitions, okay, and then to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard, it says, because of his reverent submission. And yet he went to the cross.
So how
and it's
was
kind
he
of like,
heard?
how was he heard?
Yeah.
It's all a little bit odd. I mean, several things. I think the first thing is, we're talking about Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane. It's the night before Jesus will go to the cross. Jesus is in agony there because he knows what he's going to face. He's going to bear all the sin of the world on himself. It's not just the pain of the cross, bad enough, but this kind of cataclysmic event where he'll be separated from his Father. And so he's bearing this pain. And what I love about it is he doesn't employ a stiff British upper lip. Everything's going to be all right. Don't worry, disciples. I'll be okay. No, we're told. He's offering up prayers, petition, fervent cry, tears to the one he knows could save him from death. And if you read that, you read how he works through and says, Lord, may this cup pass from me. This horrible, horrible thing I'm going to go through tomorrow. But then he adds, but not my will be done, but yours. So he kind of works through that. And does God the Father hear his prayers? Yeah, he hears his prayers, but he chooses not to answer them in the way that Jesus would want. Now, we've got to be careful. Jesus isn't some victim who's just being offered up against his will to the Father. No, he works through this pain till he comes to the point where he goes, I will give my life. And the Father has this horrible thing of allowing his Son to go to the cross. But he allowed him to go to the cross for you and me, so that our sins would be forgiven, so that we might have access to that throne of grace. Jesus was willing to go to the cross so that we could have access to the throne of grace. It's a story of love for us, but it's not just kind of sterile and passionless. This isn't a 1940s, British fighter pilot going off to do his duty. This is somebody being honest about the pain. And I think that teaches us a lot about the fact we should be honest about what we're going through.
And his attitude of reverent submission as well. He's in his pain and agony, he's still submitting to the Father, yet not my will, but yours be done. He's still remembering who the Father is, but also being, and that's a really hard balance for us to get, isn't it? To be honest about what we hate and what stinks in our lives, but also going, yes, but Lord, not my will, yours be done. That's a really hard. So I think it's a good pattern for us in our prayer, that we are to pour out our hearts, but we're to do it in a way knowing that God is God and we don't know the full story. We can't make demands on God. So thank you. What does it mean? This is really difficult, I think. What does it mean that in verse 8, he learned obedience? To me, that sounds like Jesus was a naughty boy, and then as he got bigger, he learned to be obedient. That's confusing. And then when it says he was made perfect, does that mean he was imperfect and then sort of learned a bit more and then became perfect? That's kind of not what I've heard elsewhere. What does it mean?
So you're right, first of all, this is difficult. And I guess it's worth just butting in at this point and going, we're not the last word on Hebrews, and we may well be wrong about some of this stuff. And you have a Bible and you need to kind of look at it and work it out for yourself. And by all means, get in touch and go, I think you completely got that wrong, and we'll try and put things right. But, well, what does it mean? No, exactly right. So it doesn't mean that Jesus almost improves. It was Jesus 1.0 in heaven, and then you get 2.0 when he comes to earth, because he's learned a bit of obedience and become a bit better, more perfect. That's not true. Jesus was eternally obedient to the Father, always perfect. It's one of the glorious truths of it. But there is something different, isn't there, as he lives on earth. So when he's in heaven, he's perfect, but he's not tempted at that point. He's tempted here on earth. He wasn't weak at that point. He's weak here on earth. So there's something now where, I mean, take it one at a time. His submission, his obedience are being worked out now. So as Satan comes to him and tempts him to, look, come on, you don't have to go to the cross. You can have all that you see, all these kingdoms. Let's do it the easy way. Well, there's temptation. What's he going to do? Suddenly, he proves that actually he is submissive. He proves that he is obedient. He proves that he is perfect.
So it's like he pays the cost of obedience. He has to actually put it into practice, and it's costly obedience. It's kind of learning the cost of obedience rather than learning to be obedient. He's actually having to live it in a messy, broken world in a way that he didn't have to in heaven. And then becoming perfect. That's kind of, I think,
well, it's similar, isn't it?
Similar idea, isn't it?
Every decision he makes to obey God shows his perfection. It shows. Yes, he was perfect beforehand, but he'd never had that challenge. So each time, it's kind of like a kind of a highlighter pen going, oh yeah, he really is perfect. He really is perfect. He really is perfect. And the glorious thing is, it's so unlike Adam. So Adam comes up to this first great temptation. You can be like God. Actually, yeah, I would like to be like God. Jesus passes not just the first or the second or the third, but all of these, and he proves that he is perfect.
And we see it beautifully as we read the Gospels, don't we? We see him walking down the dusty roads and obediently loving and caring for people and being our kind of perfect example. And I guess, again, if we're going to kind of try and put this into practice a bit rather than it just being, oh, that's nice, learned a bit about Jesus. Actually, Jesus' challenge to us in Luke 9 is if we want to follow him, we must take up our cross and follow him in that same way. So if we're living Christian lives that are not costing us anything, it's not costing us to be obedient, then we kind of wonder whether actually are we living that Christian life if we're not having to in a costly way forgive people, or in a costly way serve people, or in a costly way do things that don't come naturally to us. Kind of, are we actually really following this Jesus who took the cross? We're meant to be following in his steps, and his life is a bit of a clue that he's not. It's that we can't expect this to be easy. Just last question. It says that he became. This is verse 9. He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. What does that mean?
Well, okay. Through all of this, he's this source of salvation for us. That's perhaps not complex. That he dies on the cross so that I can be saved.
Yes.
Fine. The problem, I think, is for all who obey him.
Yeah, because I thought we were meant to be living by grace, and it wasn't about obeying to kind of earn it.
And because this is kind of going under the bonnet, we can use deep words, right? So this is what Christians talk about: justification and sanctification. What we do is we just bang these two things together and get a bit confused. You just got to pull them out a bit. Justification: Jesus dies on the cross to freely give me access to the throne of grace, to freely forgive all my sins, to freely allow me to be adopted into the family of God, I offer nothing to that, right? I'm forgiven completely through the work of Jesus Christ on my behalf. Grace, 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 grace. Wonderful, fantastic. But then what we think, I think particularly this is our kind of era. We kind of think like, yeah, the whole of life is this one long grace, and basically I can
what I want,
do
and
whatever
then
I
just be
want.
forgiven.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And the Bible's constantly talking about, no, if you've experienced that grace, then you'll want to obey him. You'll want to live that out, much as you've just been talking about Jesus did the same. So when you come to temptation, you simply won't go, oh, it doesn't really matter. I'm covered by, grace. That'll do nicely, thank you. I can sit back and do what I want. No, I want to obey him. I want to follow him. I want to love him with my heart and soul and mind and strength. I want all of my life to be obedient to him. And part of that obedience means, because I don't know whether you've noticed, but I'm not perfect.
Really?
And when I disobey God, when I get it wrong, or when I sin, part of the obedience means I go back to God and go, actually, I'm so sorry. I have sinned against you. Please forgive me. And so I think this is quite a helpful little reminder for us that yes, you enter the Christian life by grace. You live every day by grace, just resting in what Christ has done for you. But as I live my life, I want to live it for him in obedience to him. Does that
So I'm
make
kind
sense?
of living out the gospel.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
kind of living out the gospel of forgiveness and grace, and it's not kind of that I've just got there and I can tick the box, but it's kind of an ongoing thing. No, thank you. That's really
But it's
helpful.
it's that. Do you remember Matthew 11ish? It's talking about, Jesus talks about, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's that kind of thing that it's not kind of like wake up in the morning, got to do better today, got to score brownie points for him. No, I'm loved and I'm accepted. But because of that, I want to please my Heavenly Father today. Have we lost a little bit of that? I'm speaking personally, probably.
And I guess the fantastic thing about looking at Hebrews is that hopefully Hebrews is a really good way for us to see Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus is better. It's absolutely true, and it's a really good way of summing up Hebrews, but it just doesn't really get to it's kind of like I don't know what the word would be, but we need to see it in so much richer and so much more depth than just Jesus is better. But if we really believe what we've been reading about Jesus, that he is both on the throne of grace, but also the one who was wept, he's the one that means that we can approach the throne of grace. It's amazing, isn't it? This Jesus who he is. And I guess that's what we've been doing, looking under the bonnet. It's not just trying to explain religious, kind of Bible words, but it's actually seeing Jesus more clearly, so that we then will want to put this into practice. So I hope that's been helpful. Hopefully you can think about that a bit. But the main thing is that we see Jesus more clearly, and that we want to live for him, and that where we're in danger in our lives of drifting away from him, that he will help us, he will woo us back to him and remind us of why would we go somewhere else? Why would we? Because we're missing out. If we're drifting away from Jesus, we're missing out. So that's hopefully what this has helped us to do.
Thanks, Fiona. Same time next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.